Israel has stopped all humanitarian aid from entering Gaza, saying that it will only allow it if Hamas agrees to a U.S. plan to extend the ceasefire, the first part of a truce mediated by Egypt, Qatar, as well as the United States, ended on Saturday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says Hamas has rejected a temporary extension proposed by Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff. To discuss this further, we are now joined by Milena Ansari, who's a researcher on Israel and Palestine from the Human Rights Watch, joining us now from Jerusalem. Milena, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Please help us make sense of this. So Israel is saying that because we have reached the deadline, which was on Saturday, and the first phase has lapsed on Saturday, let's extend the first phase, this is. Hamas is saying, no, we don't want to extend the first phase. We want to move into the second phase. Please help us make sense around where the contestation is with regards to this.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. To begin with, it's difficult to make sense out of something that actually doesn't make sense and shouldn't be the case. It's really important to emphasize that when we're talking about humanitarian aid, it's not about a ceasefire deal or phase 1 or phase 2. Israel, as the occupying power in the Gaza Strip, is obligated by international humanitarian law to be allowing unfettered humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip, whether there's a ceasefire agreement or not. But most importantly, not only under international humanitarian law, you know, in the South Africa case against Israel, based on the Genocide Convention, the International Court of Justice clearly 3 times ordered binding provisional measures on Israel to allow unfettered humanitarian aid in to protect the rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention. So not only is Israel violating international humanitarian law, but it's also violating the binding orders of the International Court of Justice. And really, it's important to understand that humanitarian aid should not be connected to a deal or a bargaining chips between states or actors. It's something that should be ongoing. You know, for Human Rights Watch, in December 2024, we concluded that Israel's restriction on humanitarian aid, access to adequate water for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip amounts to the crime against humanity of extermination and is an act of genocide. So while we're seeing Israeli authorities bluntly disregarding the calls of human rights organizations and humanitarian organizations on the ground, this doesn't really make sense. Both parties need to abide by human rights law. It's not about the politics that is interfering the humanitarian situation on the ground. You know, WHO and UNRWA are using this period to vaccine children for polio virus. Many humanitarian organizations are using this moment to bring in shelters, adequate shelters. A week ago, 6 Palestinian children died from the cold. And this only tells you about the humanitarian situation on the ground that cannot wait for consensus between the political parties or consensus between the US, Israel, or Palestinian armed groups and whatnot. The ground is raising the alarm. There should be no restrictions on humanitarian aid, and all parties need to abide by human rights law, humanitarian law. It's not only about what the agreement says, but again, as you know, there has been some vagueness with regards to the ceasefire agreement, and whether extending phase 1 or going with phase 2, there needs to be humanitarian aid coming in. And again, the emphasis is on restoration and rebuilding as well. It's about having electricity come back to the Gaza Strip, because for over 2 years, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been relying on fuel and a limited entry of fuel, let me add this. So in order to really save lives and understand the importance of human safety and peace in the Gaza Strip. It's about, putting aside differences with regards to phase one or phase two, but making sure that humanitarian aid continues to come in, or we will continue to see, deaths from starvation and malnutrition, deaths from cold as well, when the reality on the ground needs unfettered humanitarian aid.
Yeah. And I know that you're speaking here about both actors looking at Israel as well as Hamas, but there is a deal in place, and part of that deal is that the humanitarian aid, and according to phase one, around 600 trucks must be allowed into Palestine, into Gaza. But here's the issue. If there's no adherence to the agreement itself, who should then take blame for it, considering once again that if you look, for instance, the EU saying that Hamas's rejection of the extension of the first phase of Gaza's ceasefire deal, adding that Israel's subsequent aid block risked humanitarian consequences. But who's supposed to shoulder the blame for this? Why aren't we moving into phase two, as Hamas is arguing? But then on the other end as well, Israel is saying that let's rather extend phase one, as per the United States' proposal.
Yeah, so I know it's important for everyone to put the blame on someone or a party, but to be honest, now is not the time to be discussing who to blame. The most important thing here is that parties need to abide by international law and the ICJ provisional measures that bound Israel to be providing humanitarian aid. When I say this, it's not about a ceasefire deal or not. When we talk about humanitarian aid coming in, this is Israel's obligation from before October 2023. Israel has placed an unlawful blockade on the Gaza Strip for more than 17 years. And if we want to blame anyone for this, I would personally blame the international community because of the silence over the years about the disregard of Israel's application to humanitarian law and human rights law. The blame is put on the international community for refusing to put pressure on Israeli authorities to allow humanitarian aid in at an unfettered scale, because the reality on the ground entails that. We should be blaming the European Union. We should be blaming the US, which has shown itself complicit in the war crimes and crimes against humanity that Israeli forces have committed on the ground in the Gaza Strip. And again, emphasis why I say it's the international community's fault, because now, even when we look at the situation in the West Bank, we're seeing complete silence. Human Rights Watch has raised the alarm about the West Bank for over a year with regards to settler violence and expansion of illegal settlements in the West Bank. And what have we seen as a response from the international community? Absolute silence, and keep echoing the two-state solution without any actual action on the ground. No pressure, no arms embargo, no targeted sanctions, no review of bilateral treaties. We cannot keep putting the blame on these two sides when we do not understand the responsibility of third states with regards to how the continuation of impunity and the cycle of violence continues when states refuse to take meaningful action. If we talk about a political solution, we should not let go of third states, including the US, including the UK, including the European Union, with regards to their lacking and providing Israeli authorities the green light to continue to do whatever they want under the illusion and allegations that Hamas is refusing. The ceasefire agreement intended for phase one to end on Saturday. Yeah. It ended. We should be moving to phase two and seeing how we can really understand the situation on the ground and respond to it, instead of responding, to silly plans with regards to Gaza. And what I mean by this is Trump's plan to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. Instead of entertaining these plans that don't make sense under and a violation under international law, we should be looking at the easy ways out, which is enter of humanitarian aid. This should be a priority. And again, it's Human Rights Watch concluded Israel is committing the war crime of starvation, using starvation as a weapon of war. And again, I emphasize, we concluded that Israeli authorities are deliberately restricting adequate access to water for the Gaza Strip. These things, water, electricity, humanitarian aid, should not be a standstill point until parties reach a consensus. It should be something that is happening on a day-to-day basis, without, bargaining chips and using it as a pressure point. We're talking about human beings not having enough water and food. And, bearing in mind, yesterday, 2 days ago, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip started fasting. It's the holy month of Ramadan. So it's absolutely unbelievable that we are having these discussions on who to blame about the situations when the civilians on the ground are paying the highest price.
Yeah. Milena, thank you so much for your time. Milena Ansari is a Human Rights Watch researcher there. On the ceasefire deal between Israel as well as Hamas, Israel is calling for an extension of phase 1 of the deal, which